A young and curious Vijayasena sits by the flickering fire, his gaze fixed on the weathered face of his grandfather, Samantasena. Once a great warrior of renown, Samantasena begins to share the tale of his youth. In a voice roughened by years of battle, Samantasena tells the story of how he, though born in Bengal, used to visit his motherland in South India and fight under the banner of the Chalukya Empire. If Samantasena had identified more with the place of his birth, he would have fought for the Pala Empire, as Bengal constituted that empire's heartland. The Pala Empire indeed had its glory days, stretching across northern India and dominating the interstate politics of the region. However, the Pala Empire, once the primary power in the Indian subcontinent, had become an embarrassing shadow of its former self. After years of failed war, parasitic politics, and constant rebellion, the empire had been pushed to the verge of collapse. Rival kingdoms rose in the power vacuum, whilst ambitious court nobles escalated the empire's demise. Even in circumstances where the Pala Empire would open its arms to welcome foreigners into its dominions, it was understandable why Samantasena would choose the country of his ancestors over the country of his birth. While the Pala Empire was in decline, the Chalukyas, once a mere vassal of the Rashtrakutas, grew strong and in time created a mighty empire of their own. The Chalukya Empire would often launch raids into territories such as that of the Chola Empire, as well as the Pala Empire, which was declining into a small kingdom. It was the perfect time for adventurers, including the Sena family, to enlist in the Chalukya army, engage in heroic battles on far-flung lands, and carve out autonomous principalities as a reward for their good service. Vijayasena absorbs the adventurous spirit of his family's journey, from merely another upper-class family in the South Indian province of Karnataka, to creating a humble chieftain for themselves in Bengal through valor, ambition, and strategy. Later in life, Vijayasena would devote an inscription to his grandfather, Samantasena, that he would defeat multiple enemies after being surrounded by them. Vijayasena embodies the teachings that through hard work, patience, and placing himself in the right position at the right time, he could seize an opportunity that could perhaps one day even raise him to the rank of king. The crackling of a new dawn rises over the forests of Radha. Vijayasena stands tall within his camp as a figure of both youth and authority. His recent ascension as the chief of his people brings with it promises of a life saturated with challenge and conquest. As the morning mist recedes against the sun's warm rays, the sounds of hoofbeats break through the morning tranquility and summons Vijayasena's attention. A lone messenger approaches, his robes dusted from a long journey, hurriedly announcing the approach of his king, Ramapala. As the camp prepared for their visitor, Vijayasena watches as the man discuss tales of Ramapala. Some of his men dismiss Ramapala as a desperate claimant to the crumbled Pala throne, while others laud him as the last hope for Bengali unity. Yet, the noise dissipates the moment Ramapala presents himself before Vijayasena, carrying with him not only the aura of a king, but of history itself. The scars on Ramapala's body and his piercing gaze exhibits a man molded by trials, hardened by loss, and fueled by purpose. Vijayasena senses that before him stands a door of destiny, a gateway to wealth, fame, power, and an eternal place in legend. With a voice echoing notes of humility and power, Ramapala imparts his story and the reason for his visit to Vijayasena. He tells a story of how a mere 2 years ago, flames had engulfed Varendra, the heartland of the once great Pala Empire. The once awe-inspiring temples laid in ruin, whilst the centers of power which had commanded complete authority were abandoned as nobles fled the city. The destabilization of the Pala kingdom had been rapidly accelerated by the first peasant revolt in the history of the Indian subcontinent. Not too far from the capital, Ramapala's older brother, King Mahipala II, lay dead on a battlefield surrounded by the rotting corpses of loyal men. It was an end reflective of the life he lived, addicted to warfare and without any regard for good policy or care for the cost imposed upon his people. He had been decisively defeated by a well-organized rebellion of vassal chiefs, under the effective leadership of Divya. Divya was once a high-ranking official serving under Mahipala II, and if conspiracies were to be believed, was an active force behind the internal destabilization of the realm as external enemies chipped away at its borders. Whilst chaos reigned high, Divya was provided ample excuse to seize power for himself under the guise of restoring order. Having slain Mahipala II by his own hand, Divya no longer had any real obstacle between him and the throne. He marched with his men to Varendra to claim the heavy crown which had belonged to the Pala for 300 years. In the midst of the turmoil, Ramapala and his older brother, Shurapala II, patiently waited in shackles behind prison bars for their chance to break free. The bodies of the two brothers were covered in signs of intense torture and dire starvation. Before the weight of chains and the shadow of betrayal marked his life, Ramapala entered the world under very different circumstances, covered with auspicious signs alike his forefather Gopala. Ramapala's body bore symbols of a ruler who would crush his enemies and restore the glory of his ancestors. Ramapala was raised with a discipline befitting a warrior king. Unlike some princes who indulged in excesses, he was taught restraint, wisdom, and the importance of justice. However, not everyone appreciated noble virtues. Ill-intentioned court nobles held the ear of his eldest brother, King Mahipala II, many of whom would have been indirectly or directly influenced by Divya. They eyed the throne and used the instances where Ramapala, supported by Shurapala II, spoke out against Mahipala II's injustices and twisted them as examples of the brothers' intentions to take power from Mahipala II. Though Ramapala and Shurapala had meant to provide sound advice to his brother and save their kingdom, they were instead ostracized and sidelined, paving the way for Divya to gain power at the expense of the Palas. Maintaining their innocence, the brothers refused to plead guilty to any charges of sedition. Unfortunately for Mahipala II, the imprisonment of his own brothers only fueled the destabilization of his realm, no doubt causing Divya much joy. It served as a rallying cry for those highlighting the injustices of Mahipala II's rule and undermined his kingship. Factionalism soared at an all-time high, and opportunistic nobles took it upon themselves to increase their standing by allying with rising powers who rose at their king's demise. Fortunately for the two brothers, imprisonment prevented them from marching alongside their eldest brother and avoid the fate of their king, whose collective misdeeds took him out to the battlefield where he lay dead. Unwilling to serve as a pawn or a victim to Divya, the two brothers call out to the prison guards to release them. Shurapala II, as the eldest of the two brothers, appealed to his authority as the successor of Mahipala II and the current king of the realm. Shurapala II's appeal was technically true at least until Divya reached the city. Nevertheless, it was also true that keeping the brothers hostage could prove more lucrative for the guards when Divya finally arrives. Ramapala, as the most capable of the two brothers, referred to his popularity amongst his subjects and skills as an experienced warrior in the service of the Pala kingdom. Ramapala gave the guards hope that the once great Pala empire can be restored if the two brothers were to be freed. The guards were reminded of their duty to the realm, and at last the brothers were set free. The winds of fate carried Ramapala and Shurapala into the lands of Bihar, where remnants of Pala loyalty still lingered like embers waiting to be reignited. Word of their escape spread swiftly, and soon those who remained faithful to the Pala dynasty rallied to their side. Shurapala II, as the eldest brother, was recognized as the rightful leader and assumed the throne of this modest stronghold. Though Bihar was a sanctuary, it was no substitute for the fertile lands of Virendra, the heartland of the Pala Empire. Shurapala II's health, already fragile from years of imprisonment, began to deteriorate under the pressure of trying to live up to the great legacy of his Pala ancestors with his small kingdom surrounded by hostile powers. At last, Shurapala took his final breaths and passed the Pala kingdom to his younger brother, Ramapala. As the funeral pyre burned, Ramapala grieved the loss of his brother, his companion, and his anchor. But in that moment, amidst the crackling of the wood and the rising smoke, he felt a new resolve harden within him. He would honor Shurapala's memory and avenge his bloodline by transforming a crumbling state into a beacon of hope. Ramapala turned his gaze inward. He needed a strong economy to assist in restoring the lost glory of the Pala dynasty and defend his borders. Ramapala's policies included introducing reduced taxation on his subjects, allowing farmers and traders to retain more of their earnings. This simple yet profound move reinvigorated the kingdom, as peasants began to plow their fields with renewed vigor and merchants flocked to the markets teeming with goods. The surge in productivity and trade not only enriched the kingdom but also began to fill Ramapala's coffers, allowing him to prepare for the challenges of rebuilding and defending his realm. Meanwhile, in Virendra, Bhima, the ambitious nephew of Divya, ascended to power. Unlike his uncle who had seized Virendra through treachery, Bhima sought to solidify his position by appealing to the masses. His policies worked towards creating a society free of disparity, where the powerful and the powerless stood shoulder to shoulder. He taxed his people heavily, not to amass personal wealth, but to fund grand charitable ventures. Yet, his oppressive taxation drained his kingdom's economy, and his ventures to create equality caused confusion within the ranks of his subjects. Consistent with his egalitarian worldview, Bhima himself lived humbly in a capital city which more resembled a town. In any case, Bhima was not a man to sit idle as his kingdom weakened. He craved power, not because of the wealth it could bring, but for the belief that he himself could reshape the world. And so he looked outward, onto the prosperous lands of Ramapala. He launched a series of ruthless raids into Ramapala's territory, slowly chipping away at Ramapala's treasury and defenses. The road was being paved for the lands of the Pala Empire to be reunited under Bhima and consolidated into his Kaivarta dynasty. Ramapala's power in Bihar was limited and his allies were uncertain. He had no desire to plunge his people into conflict without cause, and had sought stability rather than war since his ascension to power. However, the raids in Ramapala's borderlands grew too relentless to ignore. Ramapala convened his ministers in the royal court, seeking counsel before taking any drastic steps. They weighed their options. War would drain their already limited resources, but inaction would only embolden Bhima further. If they waited too long, it would not be Ramapala who marched onto Varendri, but Bhima who stormed into Bihar. After careful deliberation, Ramapala's path became clear. If the Palas were to survive, Varendri had to be reclaimed. With unwavering resolve, he made his decision. War was inevitable, and he would not wait for it to come to him. The time to act had arrived. Ramapala did not sit idle in his court, waiting for allies to come to him. Instead, he set out himself, traveling from province to province, meeting with powerful lords who once swore fealty to the Pala throne. His mission was clear: to remind them of their oaths, to rekindle their loyalty, and to win them over with rewards worthy of their service. If Varendri was to be reclaimed, he would need more than his name and claim. He needed swords, men, and unwavering commitment. The Pala king did not arrive as a desperate petitioner, but as a ruler who still commanded respect. He carried with him the weight of his dynasty, the promise of restoration, and above all, the means to reward those who aided him. He offered not only land and wealth, but also a future in which his allies would stand at his side and not beneath him. Among the first to pledge their loyalty was Mahana, a Rashtrakuta chief who was also Ramapala's own maternal uncle. He brought with him hardened soldiers trained in the southern tradition of war. Without delay, Ramapala dispatched Mahana to the north of Bengal, charging him with the conquest of Anga. The province was ruled by a King Harivarman of Vikrampur, a steadfast ally of Bhima. With swift precision, Mahana struck, bringing Anga firmly under Pala dominion. As a reward for his victory, he was entrusted with Anga's governance. From Magad, the mighty Vijayasena answered Ramapala's call to conquer Varendra. As the king of Pithi and the overlord of Magad, he ruled over a land rich in resources and military strength. A warrior in his own right, Vijayasena saw in Ramapala the last great hope to restore order to the east. From the deep forests of Aparamandara, Laxmisura also answered Ramapala's call. He was the preeminent lord of the forest chieftains with warriors who knew the land like no other. His support would give Ramapala mastery of the rugged terrain, ensuring no enemy could easily approach. Among those who rallied to Ramapala's call were Viraguna of Kotathavi and Vorapavardhan of Kausambi. Though their names did not command the same weight as the great kings and lords of the region, they were warriors of skill and ambition, each ruling over strategically placed territories. Both warriors, however, had seen enough of war to know that alliances were fleeting and loyalties could shift like tides. Yet in Ramapala they saw a king unlike most, honorable and determined, with a proven history of resilience. His vision of unity, his willingness to reward loyalty, and his unrelenting commitment to reclaiming Bengal convinced them to set aside their doubts. Together they rode toward battle, their doubts momentarily silenced by Ramapala's vision. But fate had already begun to weave its threads, and in time, the shifting tides of ambition would pit them against one who would ride beside them in the conquest of Varendra. One by one, these lords and their forces swore allegiance to Ramapala. Their banners grew united under the Pala cause. No longer was the king reclaiming his throne alone. He now commanded a coalition of warriors, chiefs and kings, bound together by the promise of victory. The war for Varendra was no longer just a struggle to reclaim lost land. It was a battle to define the future of Bengal. Vijayasena had listened intently as Ramapala spoke of his imprisonment, of his brother's death, of Bhima's unrelenting aggression, and the gathering of lords and warriors under the Pala banner. It was a tale of struggle, of resolve, and of a king who had clawed his way back from the abyss. But more than that, it was a tale of opportunity. The path was clear. Vijayasena can either remain a mere chief, bound to the familiar lands of Radha, or he can seize this chance to rise. His ancestors had left the south in search of glory, and now fate places the same choice before him. To fight along Ramapala is to carve his name into history. To hesitate is to let the tide of ambition pass him by. Vijayasena accepts Ramapala's call to battle. The banners of the Pala resurgence ripple in the wind, and the call to battle reverberates across the land. Lords and chieftains assemble their forces, each bringing with them contingents of well-equipped combat-ready troops supported by cavalry and infantry. The air hums with anticipation, yet beneath the tension is a sense of brotherhood, forged in the heat of their common cause. Of this moment it is written that the great heroes, preeminently fit to rescue the earth, with their power doubly increased by the encouragement from presence, wielding formidable weapons, with their faces looking bright as the Lord of the Stars, became attached to Ramapala. Vijayasena and Ramapala ride to the heart of the conflict, their forces arrayed behind them like a rising tide. Join me in part 2 as we witness Ramapala's struggle to reclaim Varendra and restore the fading glory of the Pala Empire. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this fun map of Bangladesh in the background, please do buy it from the link in the description, as it will help our channel grow. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share, as it will help us immensely. And if you want to go the extra step, please do support us through our Patreon. Catch you all in our next video.